Hello, and welcome to What Am I Rolling? Twice monthly RPG one-shot podcast, hosted by me, Fiona. Or normally it is. Welcome back to our world building series that we've been doing, just keeping us ticking over till I'm back on my feet here after the big move. And yeah, we are nearing the end. This is going to be the penultimate episode of our little series. So far, we've done 20 out of the 30 days of the complete world building and author's step-by-step guide to building fictional worlds by Angeline Trevina, and I've been enjoying it so far. It's one of those things where every time I come back to it, I do feel like I'm getting somewhere or getting something out of it. And whilst I appreciate these sort of episodes are more like a way for me to just splurge ideas out onto the digital notepad, so to speak, it's been quite fun. And it's nice to see where we're going. And yeah, I'm interested to see what our 5 sort of prompts we're going to do today are going to be like. So, if you're just joining us, we have done, as I said, up to 20 days so far, got another 10 days to go, and this is what we have. So the first day, we talked about genre and setting. We've gone for a supernatural folklore sort of vibe in an urban setting. We've put it in the late 1880s, early 1890s, turn of the century. We've just basically taken London as our sort of main blueprint and just used the area of the Isle of Dogs to sort of have our little starting point and then map out from there. We've talked about inspirations here. So again, we're talking more about like a mystery, maybe some Veronica Mars, Agent Carter, with that whole sort of like Buffy Angel sort of vibe as well. Ultimately, the 2 principles we've got down here is that the undead live and need the help of the living, and fighting or violence is the last resort for it. And we've also got some fishing involved, which is always good. We've put down a few ideas of systems that this setting might be complementary to. So we've got Monster of the Week, Vaesen, Hunter the Reckoning, The Between, Vampire the Masquerade, Trophy Dark, Trophy Gold, and Blades in the Dark, the Dustfall setting as an inspiration as well. Day 2 was drawing our map, which again, I said we've based off the Isle of Dogs at the time that's of political upheaval, certainly at the turn of the century. Again, the size of this map fluctuates quite a bit, which is okay. Again, it's a nice way to be like, this district is actually much bigger than we anticipated, and maybe there's more nooks and crannies that we can find out today. We've talked about water sources. We've talked about main governing like places to be, in Folly House. We've talked about the actual landscape itself, what the cobble streets and sort of the soil is like, even a peat layer somewhere. We talked about natural resources. We talked about clay pits, the sapient species, where we've sort of decided that it's human mostly, but about 50% of the population on the isle itself is undead. And the reason that is the case is that the water that encircles the isle itself, the Thames, or another fictional name will come up for that particular river at some point, traps the dead on the island. Water is almost like a barrier or a glyph or some sort of way that undead cannot cross it without either being in great danger or probably a lot of pain. We've talked about food, we've talked about farmed animals, we've even talked about natural predators, the weather and climate, this idea that actually all the weather and climate is controlled by their majesties, royal appointed alchemicalists and meteorologists. We've also talked about giving away free umbrellas to people of the docks and the wharf for paying clients. There was a lot of focus on trade routes and travel, again, because this was a place where people would come and ship their goods into, so we made a big deal about that, big focus on that. For the prompt of important trade towns, we actually came up with important wharfs or sort of docks, which we would know about, included stuff about like auctioning stuff there. We've talked about education, law and order, the government structure, what it sort of looks like as a sort of top-down view, the economics, the concept of a family and what does that kind of mean here. We even looked at gender roles, which I was quite surprised about, to be honest with you. But again, I guess depending on where you're basing your society, it is something that you have to talk about and discuss. And then finally, we talked about employment. Again, quite a big deal in the world that we have set up here, focusing on that idea of industrialization and cargo shipping and stuff is quite important to the area that we have made together. All right, let's get straight down to it. Let's look at today's prompts, which is going to be day 21 to 25. Let's start off with day 21. Day 21. Class divides and social mobility. What sort of class system does your society have? How big is the gap between the rich and the poor? Maybe the different classes and socio-economic groups live alongside one another, or perhaps they are strictly segregated. How do they view one another, and how do they treat one another? What chances are there for social mobility? Can someone in your world marry into a higher class? Does education give people a chance to rise up through society? Does employment give them those chances? Perhaps there's something else that can take them up through the ranks of society. Something completely unique to your world. Some kind of lottery, or a tournament. Or, of course, there may be no way at all for your characters to better their situation. Mind you, that won't necessarily stop them from trying. This is a great source of conflict in your world, and particularly important in dystopian stories. Make sure you're tying it into your culture and the history of your world. Prejudice can run deep for many, many generations. What started it? Where and when did it begin? How has it become so ingrained? Okay. Again, maybe we're cheating a little bit here, but if we're basing this off the turn of the century, industrialization of the UK and London, then I think we have that sort of class system, and I think it's just easy to sort of copy and paste that into this thing. So the idea of having upper, middle, and lower class often meaning the working class. So how big is the gap between rich and poor? And are they strictly segregated? I think, again, just following the system that we sort of are adopting from sort of almost like real life, yeah, it makes sense in if we're basing it on sort of Victorian times, it's quite a strict structure. This is very interesting. How do they view one another and how do they treat one another? Well, we've got to make out that the working class, the people that are doing the labour and stuff, they are like the most prized, they are the most sort of like influential and powerful because there's quite a lot of them and we need them in order to keep the economy going. And because of the union stuff, but I don't think it's going to be that traditional of like, well, we're going to look down on them and break them till they actually do what we say. I think actually they have a lot of sway in things, and maybe a lot of the politics and maybe a lot of the power is actually with them. And so the sort of middle and upper classes have to like carry favor with them because they know that their worth and their power can really empower them to do stuff, if you see what I mean. I'm not explaining it properly, but they're not treated as workhorses. They're treated as a valuable asset to complete tasks and to do the work. So it's like almost like an understanding working relationship. They might not like each other. They might see the idea that the upper classes and even some of the middle class don't like to get their hands dirty and aren't practical and don't see they don't make decisions that are practical. Whereas maybe the middle class and the upper class are looking down on each other and on the working class and deciding that, well, they're too practical. They're not willing to see beyond or see like other opportunities because they've always done it this way. Why would they change their views? So maybe that's what I'm trying to go for, rather than like, well, they've got more money or they don't have money. Certain people are doing a lot of the work and they get a lot of money for said work. Actually, maybe we're just going to change that round. Hang on, let's think about this properly. If it's of the isle itself, let's break it down into that sort of like micro level. So if we have like working, middle and upper, I think in this case, obviously the working class is the majority of the dock workers who are making ends meet, but they are working incredibly hard. The middle is probably those agents, the wharfs, etc., that are trying to like agree contracts, talk to the different wharfs to try and make sure that logistics is right and like working together. And so that is almost like, yeah, it is almost like business people per se. But actually the actual clients, the traveling merchants and stuff, those are sort of the upper class perhaps. And so, yeah, that might make it easier just for my head rather than just keeping it to like the whole district, but actually breaking it down like that. That kind of works in the sort of economy that we sort of come up with this idea of the work culture. So that upper class is what we would sort of term as the traveling merchants, the people with the cargo, etc. The middle class is the folks who are working at the wharves that are sort of higher up, sorting out the invoices, being the contacts, almost like customer service roles. And then the working class are those other people who are the dock workers who are actually doing the jobs at hand and moving cargo physically. And yes, it is segregated. I do think that. But I do think that in order for these people to work and carry on their everyday lives, they need each other. You can't have two of these groups without the third, otherwise it all breaks apart. The power is maybe with that working class because they are the ones that are doing the heavy lifting, so to speak. If they find a way that's easy for them to do, they're absolutely going to do it. And even if that is short-sighted, that is what they're going to do. So maybe there's that sort of thing, well, they are very practical compared to, say, the middle class who may be trying to work out ways to make it more efficient in the long term. And then maybe the upper class, they maybe don't think much of the other two, but they just know that they need those two groups of people. I think that makes more sense in my head. So yeah, we'll do that. I will say that there is one group of people which I haven't included in this, which is maybe short-sighted of me. But what about the undead? I think that's a separate group. I think with those other three groups of upper, middle, and working, the undead is seen as a source of fear, obviously, a threat as well, both to work and to everyday social. So they're not talked about and they don't have any rights as a result. It's almost like a hidden secret. What chances are there for social mobility? Can someone marry in a higher up class? Does education give a chance? Does employment? Or is there something else completely? I mean, I think there is chance for social mobility. I don't think it happens that often. Because I think once you are given a certain label, it's very hard to break out of it. I think that's why it's quite strictly segregated in that sense. But I think if you worked hard enough and gained enough money, you could then move from, say, working class to sort of middle class where you maybe have your own business. And then obviously if that is very successful, maybe you have some sort of viral success of something, you move then maybe to the upper class. But it is incredibly rare to do so. Roughly, I think it's a mixture of education to an extent, but mostly the employment opportunities that allow you to move up the social ladder. That said, it is very easy to move down the social ladder, or fall, she says, if you become an undead. It's instantaneous, I think. I think any prejudice towards the undead, at least, it just comes from that sort of lizard brain, sort of just the fear of the undead. So I think that's quite straightforward. That's easily explained away. That's just been around since the ancient times. Maybe those penny dreadfuls probably also didn't help the... because people love a good horror. They love a good, quick, gossipy tale. So the idea of the rise of the printing press and those penny dreadfuls that are just sold keeps people entertained and gossiping. And so that's how that sort of prejudice against the undead has been ingrained, because it's such a natural fear. When you see a spider for the first time, and just the way you go, there's too many legs, it's too many eyes, you instantly fear that. So I think there's always been a natural fear about the undead, and then having these penny dreadfuls and these printing articles about stuff has just caused it to spread like wildfire, and that's how it's become so ingrained in this particular society. Other than that, I don't think there's anything else. I'm sure there's prejudice a little bit, perhaps, to people who are socially trying to move up, but once they prove their worth, it's absolutely fine. Again, I don't necessarily want to tell stories about social climate. That's not the point of the setting per se. Even though I do see the importance of class divide and what we've created so far, it's not something I'm particularly interested about looking into. I mean, the idea of a missing, say, duke or foreman, and discover that they have been killed and actually turned into an undead, and they're trying to still get their job, that's more interesting than somebody trying to marry higher up, perhaps. Yeah, again, I'm not really keen to tell stories about that per se. That's not really what I'm interested in, but it's, again, good to think about it in the background. All right, let's move on. Day 22. Religious and spiritual belief structure. When you're looking at religious and spiritual beliefs in your world, remember that there are going to be more than just one, and they've probably changed over time. They've been replaced, pushed aside, become old-fashioned. The rites and rituals have changed, parts may have been forgotten or misinterpreted, or purposefully changed to reflect a changing society, or to fit the agenda of those in charge. There may be conflict between different religions, causing wars, genocide, changing governments, the laws, causing huge shockwaves in society, or they may rattle along one another quite happily, borrowing from one another from time to time. Creating religions can be a really fun part of world building. giving you the opportunity to imagine deities, creation stories, festivals, holidays, rites, and rituals. You can write songs, poetries, chants, entire scriptures if you choose. Think carefully about the day-to-day impacts your religion has on your characters, both the believers and non-believers. Perhaps the calendar revolves around festivals, perhaps a working week or school terms. What impacts do rules and commandments of your religion have? Are they enshrined in law, or are they at odds with the law? How does it impact the family? Perhaps it heavily influences the educational curriculum, or the punishments dished out for crimes. Also, think about migration of your people. What happens when a new religion is introduced, when they come up against one another? Remember that religion as an institution is a different thing to someone being religious or spiritual. A person can be deeply spiritual without adhering to the culture of one religion or another. People often pick and choose the parts of religion that suits them, that back up their beliefs. They are often happy to ignore or sideline the bits that don't suit them. Okay. So, obviously we are creating a world that is sort of set in Victoriana London, Victoriana UK, England. So, we know that there are many, many different faiths, almost like a melting pot of faiths in certainly London. There will be Christians, we know that there will be Hindus, Muslims, Jews, Sikhs, Buddhists, and a whole other range of folks. So I think we should keep that melting pot there. I think that's quite important. And also having not only sort of the major religions, but any subcategories of them as well. Maybe on the isle itself, there are loads of little temples or places of worship that people can go to. Because ultimately, we don't discriminate the employment on faith. There is a job for anyone and everyone. If for whatever reason people don't take, say, the Sunday to worship, that's fine. There are other people that could take that job for them. And it's again, there's that sort of thing where there'll always be something. You know, if you request the time off because of a spiritual or religious reason, then that is absolutely fine and it will be respected, that choice. Equally, I would say that maybe 1 in 5 people aren't religious, certainly on the Isle, and much of the civic life and the society in general is secular. So there maybe is not one like outstanding religious character. Maybe we assume it's Christianity because that is maybe of the time that the most people would go for it. But at the same time, you're not judged for having a religion or for not having a religion, if you see what I mean. One thing I would say, though, is that they probably all have very different opinions of what the undead is doing here. You know, the idea of reincarnation probably doesn't work here as much. And so there'll be odd little tweaks to stuff about life after death and what if the dead rose again. And maybe that's the reason why people are religious or choose a religion to practice. Because not only does it give answers to any other questions that they're seeking about life in general, but like trying to understand and justify why the dead have returned is probably a big thing on everyone's minds. And that could be fun, again, if we were doing this, if we were developing out other faiths to be in the setting, what their answer to the undead is and how we should treat them. And treat those who have been afflicted with such a disease in quotation marks. Maybe they're even united in sort of like an opposition to the undead, saying that it is unholy, that it's something against gods in general, because it's nothing divine to be brought back in such a way. I think ultimately I'm being kind of careful with this question. Right now in the world, there's a lot of conflict of world religions just now. And I personally don't know enough about that sort of thing. And so it maybe feels a bit blasé or a bit simplistic to like mash them all together and be like, everyone gets on, blah, 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 you know, and then puts them into that. Like, I'm sure there are tensions and there are conflicts of interests and teachings between all the faiths that we sort of have in this sort of melting pot idea. But again, I don't think it's a part of the story we want to tell because we have this other problem of the undead is back and how do they respond to it. So that bit I think would be quite interesting to, at a later date, research and be like, okay, so this is Sikhism's take on life after death, or Buddhism, you know, or any of the top sort of big religions of the world. Again, it's not something I want to explore just now, but I think it's just good to keep in mind. And I think I would like, personally, yeah, they could be like, obviously a gentle frustration or rubbing up against each other, but I do like the idea that they are quite happily borrowing from one another. Maybe even like having when the faith leaders talk about stuff in their particular services, they, say, well, I spoke to so-and-so of this particular faith and they gave this. And it's almost like not debating, but almost a discussion of the different points of view and seeing and trying to understand different points of view rather than be like, no, you're wrong. So I like that idea that actually maybe all the faith leaders who are on this island do talk to each other and actually get on quite well, even if they do have disagreements with each other's teachings. It is more of a meeting of minds and respectfully agreeing to disagree, if you see what I mean. Also, because work doesn't necessarily stop for a particular religion, there's always a job for whoever wishes it. So I think holidays and festivals and stuff, they are protected in the sense of like, oh, you definitely will get that day off. You can take it off as a paid holiday. But I also think that it's more likely that the work schedule of the docks, and certainly this particular district, doesn't adhere to one particular religion's like festival cycle. Like, we don't stop work for Easter. We don't even stop work for, say, Christmas. But maybe we only stop work if one day per month we have to, reset the clocks or something like that. It's something more like, not tied to a religion, but tied to like the working force. So like, we do change from GMT to BST for the summer daylight, so everyone gets the day off. If you see it's more tied to that schedule rather than the schedule of a religion. So, for example, maybe the week at the end of December and beginning of January, all work ceases because it's too cold. The river's frozen, so the boats can't get in. And it always happens. So as a result, we know that it's a very light working shift, for example. So people are given it as a sort of time off. Are they enshrined in law or are they at odds with the law? I don't think they're at odds with the law. But at the same time, I don't think they're enshrined. They're just sort of like examples of way to think things out. I think a lot of times something I find is that sometimes you just need advice and listening to other, philosophies. Maybe that's what I'm thinking of really, is that it's spiritual beliefs, religions, they are more philosophies of ways to like lead a better life for you, but one person's way of thinking of what a better life isn't the same as another one's. So I think that's what it is. It's more of a guideline of philosophy to, if you're lost, it's somewhere to find yourself and how to treat others, etc., as a general sort of rule. And as we said before, they know that they're not one religion for everyone, so they do borrow from each other. So I don't think it's at odds with the law, but I think it's just like, here's something interesting, so it's in the middle, I think. How does it impact family? Is it heavily influenced by the educational system or the punishments? No. I think its impact on family varies from family to family. If one of the leaders of the family unit is more religious or more spiritual, then that would obviously affect the decisions they make. But the educational system is more grounded in the work environment and the employment industry, and the punishments, they are sort of separate of that. So yeah, I think religion is separate from the actual governing of day-to-day stuff. What happens when a new religion is introduced when they come up against each other? This is interesting. I wonder then we could have this sort of story hook where a new religion is preaching that we shouldn't be afraid of the undead. It has to be something that has to go against every single one of these sort of more established, more traditional religions and spiritual belief systems. So I think if something like that comes up where it's like, it is like an undead congregation or, services, and that could be quite interesting. I think that's the only thing that they'd vehemently oppose is something around that topic. Everything else, again, they will have the discussion around it and agree to disagree and argument, etc. But it would never go out into sort of open conflict. And as I've sort of said, there is a lot of places of worship on the Isle. Like, I don't want to be like, there's only 3 big buildings. I think there's a number of buildings and small rooms. I think, and very importantly, I think there would be like a small worship room or a dedicated room for worship for any worker who needs it in each of the individual wharfs or in these sort of auction houses, etc. Because again, it's trying to accommodate workers of different faiths and different beliefs. Just, accommodate for that and not treating one group above another, because ultimately they're all there to work and get the money, and they don't get paid differently because of different belief systems. So yeah, I think that's covered it, or at least all I want to say on it just now. An easy one. Day 23, magic. This can be another really fun part of world building, but remember, with great power comes great responsibility. The important thing to bear in mind when you're building a magic system is that it has limitations. If there are no limitations, then your hero can solve every single problem, every barrier, every conflict with a click of their fingers. Without limitations, you kill off any chance of conflict and tension, effectively killing off your story. So, let's look at limitations for your magic system. Firstly, you can limit the magic itself. Don't make your characters all-powerful. Don't give every single ability possible. Limit what magic allows them to do. Perhaps magic manifests differently in different people. Perhaps it is only strong in people during the teenage years. Maybe it only works when the moon is full, or on Thursdays, or when Mars is in retrograde, or whatever you decide. You can also give your magic system consequences. Maybe using magic tires people out to the point where they can barely stand, or gives them unbearable migraines. Perhaps it prematurely ages them, or removes some of their memories. Oh my god, that's brutal. It might be incredibly complicated to use and difficult to learn, requiring years of study for even a rudimentary knowledge of it. Perhaps much of the knowledge has been lost or needs to be translated from a long-dead language. Again, also think about the effect it has on day-to-day life. Nothing exists in isolation, and you can change your entire world by simply changing one aspect of it. Perhaps all education revolves around magic, or the laws are based on it. Maybe they use magic to grow crops, to build houses. Maybe they raise magical animals. Perhaps only certain people are allowed to learn and use magic, and maybe there are harsh punishments for using magic unlicensed. Make some notes about magic in your world and how it fits in with the rest of society. You can also continue with the bonus lesson on building magic systems at the back of this guidebook. Alright, this is going to be actually a very easy one. There's no magic in this world. It just seems like there's magic. I think it is more of a scientific nature. Again, if we're thinking of that sort of like penny dreadfuls and folklore stuff, like I think there isn't like people that can grant wishes or cast fireballs or anything like that. So there's no way for humans to do it. But anything beyond the supernatural, it is more, like I said, ghosts. It's something about the biology of it. There is a tangibility for it. You can't just conjure people. That said, I do think there are maybe scientists, or at least science theories about how we could bring someone back from the dead and use it almost like that Frankenstein, Jekyll and Hyde like themes and a horror to bring people back rather than like magic. So it's science magic rather than anything else. Because again, it's revolving around the idea of bringing back the dead and that certain things stop them from moving. And maybe it's like a belief in the old ways. Like I said, it's not magic. It just is a way of doing things. Like, in order to defeat a witch, you must turn her around 4 times with shins. That sort of weird things where it's like, almost like you're trying to hack the world and you just happen to find the right code, the right bit. It is not like, ooh, I cast these spells. Oh no, this is why I'm going to get myself tangled up. I think, it is using, like, you have to use some sort of, like, resource. Maybe if we're thinking of, say, for example, the anime Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, which I appreciate is quite a niche reference. But what I liked about it was that when they did magic, in quotation marks, it was transforming something. So they had to take a bit of themselves or a bit of the ground and change it into something. It's more of a transference. There we go, a transference of stuff rather than like just making things appear out of thin air. I'd also say, I think, just thinking about this out loud, I think then there is a business in dealing with the undead and exorcising demons in quotation marks or ghosts and all that sort of thing, and hence why I think ultimately coming to the reason why I wanted to build this setting in the first place, the idea of having investigators investigating the paranormal and trying to help those either pass over or resolve whatever issues they have. So having ways to communicate through them. So using a Ouija board or a letter writing or tarot cards or even a seance. There you go. Seance is what I was thinking of. Those are more likely in this setting, I think. So now we've got those sort of basic ideas on the table. Let's change it a little bit. So I think it does manifest differently in different people. I think everyone is capable of doing it, but it's very complicated to use and requires years of study and a dedication to learning these arts. Because often it is more researching the theories and the stories behind it and then acquiring the elements in order to perform such rituals or be able to communicate with the undead that we can't see. So like I'm thinking of ghosts and ghouls and that sort of thing. And actually, going off what we said in our previous prompt, I think our investigators would have to have a good number of contacts with faith leaders to get their opinions on stuff. And maybe if they've got any stories from their particular scriptures that could help identify what creature is causing the current chaos that is happening. I'd also say, because we did put in our genre, our inspirations, the idea of Suicide Squad and Misfits, I think people are born with slight superpowers, but it's not the usual, like, I can fly, I can do laser beams or anything like that. It is more supporting roles, like you could see, you had the sight to see the ghosts, or you can read books supernaturally fast. It's like what I would call like class B superhero powers. They're not the A game, like, wow, they're super fast, they can do these things. It is more useful for investigation. So maybe investigatory superpowers is another element to this. And I would say, like, using them over and over again, it tires you out, it exhausts you, because it's using your own bodies and stuff like that. That's what I think so. And similarly, like, if you're doing the rituals and stuff like that, it tires you out. Also, you lose those resources, so you have to go replenish them. So that's a practical element as well. We've talked about this before. I don't think there's an education system for it. All of it is sort of found knowledge. We don't use it to use crops. We don't use it to raise animals per se. We use it to more identify unusual, maybe fey creatures. I don't think people are punished for using it. What, if anything, what the impact it has on everyday life is that there is a secret order or a secret group of investigators who are charged with finding out these things to keep people happy and not cause a fuss or a riot, so to speak. You know, it's almost like in the RPG, the D Sanctum, you are playing characters who can use magic like barely, and you're about to be sent for execution, but then you're pulled out of it saying like, hey, we're actually going to use you and your powers to help defend Her Majesty and the UK against magic attacks and all that sort of thing. That's the kind of thing I think of, is that you're using any power you have to investigate and solve mysteries that involve the undead and the supernatural. So it's almost like fighting fire with fire, so to speak. That's a more in-depth answer than I thought it was going to be. I was going to say no was going to be the answer, but actually it's more complicated than that. Like I said, it's not magic, it's almost like scientific magic, or things that we can't explain, that isn't the, I pull out a wand and I cast firebolt at it, you know. So I think, yeah, I quite like that. Day 24, festivals and celebrations. Have a look at your world so far and think about the reasons your people might celebrate a festival or special holiday. Are they based on agriculture, on the calendar, on the sun and moon phases? Perhaps there are religious festivals or magic festivals. Perhaps they celebrate an important event in history. There may be celebrations around the rites of passage, you know, coming of age, births, marriages, deaths. Celebrations will exist at a family level, and at a local level, and at a national level, and even an international level. Think about how these festivals are celebrated, which traditions are upheld and which have been abandoned. Consider what foods might be available, the kind of entertainment they would have, the level of technology. Does everyone get to celebrate? Does the whole of society shut down for celebrations? Because of their job, there are likely to be those who have no choice but to continue working through the holidays. There may also be people who are barred from the festivities. Are there festivals that are diversive and cause conflict? Festivals that attract protests or that have been outlawed altogether? Okay, let's start off easily on this front. Absolutely, I think we'll have all those ones done at the family level. So we'll have coming of age, birth, marriage and deaths. We'll go on to death in a second, but I think those at the family level, those make sense. Because we said earlier that all faiths are welcomed on the Isle, that, yep, people celebrate all their respective festivals. And actually, I would say do invite people to come and celebrate with them if they are able to. But as I said, they don't necessarily get the day off work like maybe we do in today's world because there's no need to. per se. Like the work is revolving around the work calendar and the work schedule rather than one particular religious calendar, so to speak. But as I said, all faith celebrations are absolutely welcome here. And if you're able to take it off because of the work, you're more than welcome to. I'm just looking at the other things. I don't think there's anything based on agriculture. I'm not necessarily going to do anything about sun and moon phases per se, not like solaces or something like that. Well, maybe, actually, no, that's a lie. I think clocks going forward and clocks going back, I think you get that as a day off because it will take, I don't know, maybe it's one of those things like traditionally the clockmakers of the Isle had to go around to every single house and building to change the clocks so that it would all be things. And so people couldn't work, so that people were out of sync by 1 hour. So they had to do it all in one day. Maybe that's still taken as like, take the day off, enjoy the day you get back as we reschedule the contracts, etc. Yeah, sure. And I think maybe once a month there is something on the Isle to celebrate, but it's not necessarily tied to a religion or to work, but it's just like this month's theme is the Mayflower Day, and there's a history. Like it's almost like, you know, when you see like exhibits at history museums, stuff. Maybe there's like a day which celebrates an aspect of the Isle's history or community, and that everyone is invited to come along and celebrate. Trying to include the idea of community. How well attended it is up for debate because people are working all the time. But there is trying to make like a sense of community as a result of being like, hey, let's celebrate our community and our culture and history that's happened upon the Isle. Does everyone get to celebrate? Well, I think everyone bar the undead. And speaking of that, I think anything to do with death or the passing of someone, as we sort of said earlier, I think rather than it being a time of mourning, it's a time of celebration. It has to be positive, because if it's not positive, there's a real risk that they will come back and haunt you and it'll be your fault as a result. So I think anything to do with death, any festivals to do with death, it's more of a celebration of life instead. And maybe you have to keep remembering, I'm thinking of, you know, like Mexican Day of the Dead, and maybe some of the traditions you see in sort of Asian cultures, that idea that we must remember our ancestors and keep remembering them, because if they're in our thoughts, they don't fade away and they aren't gone forever. Maybe you have to have like a yearly sort of reminder, like, oh, it's been 25 years since Aunt Gladys passed, and and have a quick reminder and thanks of gratefulness to be like, you're still in our thoughts, etc. Again, to keep off that fear that they will come back and haunt you years down the line. Again, more of a superstitious thing, and maybe people only do that initial like celebration of life before leaving others to celebrate in their own ways. Are there festivals that are divisive and cause conflict? Well, I'm sure there are. I think, actually, we did talk about this, that idea of this hunt that used to happen to hunt the undead down, almost like a fox hunt, we used to say, but it has been outlawed on other districts. No, not other districts. It's been outlawed on this district. Maybe other districts have a yearly hunt, very much like the Purge, I realise now, because, again, of a way to sort of drive out the darkness and drive out evil. Maybe it's that sort of a mixture of like, there's a growing sense of like, actually, these are people too, and they're not monsters. But also, like, it's maybe a bit unseemly. Like, people get very excited and like gear up and like, oh, we're ready for the apocalypse, that sort of thing. And it's not polite to do that in society when, it feels cruel. It feels cruel, if anything. So yes, those have been outlawed. But I think every so often, one of the other districts tries to bring it back of some sort. Can't think of anything else at a national level other than maybe like coronation stuff, which I'll put in just for good measure, I think. Yeah, because we talked before about like the idea of when one of the royal family passes that they don't actually pass. Maybe all we ever have is coronation stuff, and then suddenly the old queen mother or queen father disappears, and we never speak of them again, and all their sort of mentions of them are just wiped from the records as a result, which is quite horrible. Those are enough for us to go on. Again, what I think I love about the idea of festivals and celebrations is that easily, depending on what your players want to do, you could easily come up with different festivals or different events for them to take part in. Like it talks about here, like what foods might be available, what kind of entertainment they would have. Again, I don't think I'm going to go into detail about it, particularly just now, because I think, for example, if I knew that they were planning to infiltrate or attend an unlicensed undead hunt, then maybe that's when I would plan like what kind of food they would have and like the entertainment and stuff like that. That's when I would go into more detail about it. I think this is just enough for us to get going as a result. And certainly like the idea of like what kind of festivals would the Isle host about their community and culture every month. Again, would it be the same 12 things every month? Again, I'm just going to pick up the sort of 365 days a year, 52 weeks, 12 months, etc. I'm just going to use that for the basis now rather than change anything like that. Because again, a lot of this stuff is grounded in a alternative history of events, so I'm not trying to tweak too much here. And I don't think I need to tweak too much anyway. I want it to feel like it's a world like our own without having to like jump various barriers of disbelief. All right, day 25 is technology. What is the level of technology that exists in your world? Even when you're writing a fantasy set in a medieval type setting, they can still have technology and knowledge that outstrips ours today. Many ancient civilizations had technology and invented things that would amaze us, and many of them had technology and knowledge that has been forgotten. Some of their achievements are still beyond our understanding. While they might not have electric lights or the internet, they might have something fantastical and beyond our own abilities. They might have technology run by magic or be able to harness the power of the moon and stars. They might rely on fire or on steam, on gas or lightning. You might be writing about a futuristic world, in which case you might need to invent your own technology. Look at the technological advancements of the last few generations. Look where the interest is. Look at the trends and try to project them into your future world. And don't be scared about getting it wrong. You're writing about a possible future. There is no need to accurately predict it. Just keep bringing back the single question of what makes sense in your world. And look at the impact of technology on the lives of your characters. Does it enhance their lives or is it invasive? Is it available, accessible, and affordable for everyone? Has it replaced jobs or changed the way people live their lives? How has it impacted different people and groups of people both positively and negatively? Interesting. Okay. So we've kind of put it to be this Victoriana age of industrialization. So there's a lot of steam power and I think obviously the beginnings of the use of electricity as well. So it's almost like a mixture of like gas lamps, all that sort of thing, but then electricity's coming through, as is this industrialization of like steam. We've talked about those mech suits before that help things up, but we're still using horses as well. So it's almost like a hodgepodge. We're in that center bit of like transitioning from one era to another, I think. Like we talked about that idea of this sort of monorail-esque type thing going over and it replacing and sort of changing the sort of almost like carriages going over into one sleek sort of train. So that's currently happening. So again, all this progress, everything is changing and never stops. It's always in motion. And that's sort of seen as a good thing, that we're progressing towards a better way to be more efficient, to get more work done. And it's really good for us. It's helping people. So people do see it as helpful. I think the biggest bit of technology that we've talked about that I've not really gone into detail about is how do the royal appointed alchemicalists and the meteorologists are able to change the weather in their balloons? Is it by throwing substances into the clouds and making it rain or changing the surroundings? Like, again, I love that idea, but that's the main thing that is unexplained just now, is how do they change the weather? Here's the thing though. Does it enhance the lives or is it invasive? Well, we kind of talked about it. Is it available, accessible and affordable for everyone? It is, but with a bit of an asterisk. I think money isn't the issue, it's time. If you are time poor, it's very hard to be able to look at these things and implement it. It is more likely to be implemented by people from those different social groups we were talking about, the upper and middle class. Maybe there's a very big, tough negotiating period with the working class who obviously have to use this stuff and it's not being forced upon them and it's having to, a difficult learning curve, so to speak. So I don't think it's accessible or affordable to everyone, but in the sense of people being more time poor if you're working all the time. Has it replaced jobs? Now, I think that's a good question. Again, there's all this talk about AI recently. I think it has. I think more and more things are getting automated. So suddenly, maybe there is an upcoming thing soon whereby the reason that the dock workers are sort of rioting, even though they're in a good spot, is because there's the use of steam-powered automatons or something similar, maybe even like powered by alchemical substances, uranium, she says, question mark. And so they don't need that many job contracts anymore. And then when people are striking, perhaps then that's when, we talked about this before, where the wolves are going to turn to people who are desperate for work and desperate to have somewhere to live and have a purpose. They'll turn to the undead and use them instead because they are an unlimited resource. And it kind of doesn't matter if they get mangled up or destroyed because that's one less undead. So that could be an interesting sort of dilemma to talk about. Yeah, that sort of brings back in that the dock strikes and stuff like that, is that getting replaced by these bits of technology. And if they are going to go strike on it, well, that's fine by us. We've got another workforce that we can use. So yeah, I guess it all comes back to that whole thing about the undead and how the existence of such a group impacts not only that structure of the class system that we've got, but also faith, magic as well. If it's like, how do we get rid of or how do we bring back people in a certain way? Probably goes into medicine as well. Festivals, all that sort of thing. Anything around death itself has to be changed, and the technology as well. It all adds up. This sort of thing, this idea of the undead having to be among us unwillingly. Yeah. All right, those are our 5 prompts today. So we've looked at class divides and social mobility. We talked about religious and spiritual belief structures. We looked at magic, but we sort of talked about it as a sort of science magic rather than magic. We looked at festivals and celebrations, and then finally we looked at technology. Oh, wow. Yeah, it's starting to come into play a little bit. Yes, I feel like I've done it all right in these ones. Again, these are just sort of initial impressions. They're not fully fleshed out. And maybe again, having another think about it, if I was going to come back to all of this and flesh it out, then maybe I would change certain things. Because I know it's not, again, it's just trying to get all the stuff out there in some sort of format. But I do admit I like how each of these prompts has tied back into that main thing of like the dead walk among us. Because with a topic like the dead, it feels like this come into each of these prompts a lot more. Maybe I'm focusing it on a lot more than we did in the previous couple of episodes. And it just feels like that's the standout thing of this setting, is that the dead are here rather than anything else. So I think we've laid the groundwork and then we've tied in some of the big sort of principles that we came up with. So I'm quite happy with that. But like I said, it's more about just getting ideas out there and then fleshing it out later. Like I feel some of the things I'd come back to and go, I don't like that, and changing it around and stuff. I will say, I really like the idea of the magic. And because I was like, we don't have magic. And I was like, well, no, it could be seen as magic. So I quite liked interpreting that in that way. So I thought that was good. But there you go. That is days 21 to 25 of our 30-day world building series. I hope you're enjoying it so far. And yeah, next time we meet, we're going to do the final 5 days and have a review over all we've done. So thank you so much for sticking with it, and I'll see you next time.